So today I wanted to kind of talk about what I've been doing to kind of build my current studio setup, which is kind of a hybrid of analog synths and semi-modular Eurorec synths. So probably it's taken me about 2 years or so. I kind of wanted to go this direction because I'm looking for a specific sound, kind of combination of analog and modular. Not full modular with, the walls and racks of the Eurorec gear. I've kind of inched my way into Eurorec using the little desktop modular setups, which I'm really enjoying being able to use and learn on. I chose the pieces that I have in my collection because of the first doing a lot of research on them and spending some time listening to the demos. I'm always captivated by sound quality first. So if something impresses me from a demo perspective with sound, that's normally what gets me more interested in looking into the technical specs and then ultimately deciding if it's going to be right for me. The next items were actually the first items were the analog synths. I'd always had a love for the Access Virus. Access Virus is one of those old school synths from back in the day, probably early 2000s or so. It was made popular by the type of synthesis that it can create. It's actually known for the big fat super saws, but it also has more flexibility than that. And the thing for its time was the actual plug-in, which is unfortunately not as great as it used to be because it's kind of fallen off the charts as far as Access music is concerned. So I'm hoping that they pick up the ball and bring it up to date so that it'll continue to be viable and being able to use it with the Access Virus. So as I was saying, the number one thing that I was more interested in having is kind of a combination of really nice analog synths on top of the software stuff that I still use, and don't get me wrong, I still love. One of my absolute favorite synths is or set of synths, the UVI collection. I actually use Falcon, but with Falcon I have access to be able to use the other UVI emulations libraries, which are there's tons of them. They do a lot of emulation modeling based on old synths. So that was kind of what attracted me towards using them to begin with. My other favorite is Omnisphere. Omnisphere is super duper flexible if you're looking for a software-based synth. I love it because it allows you to be able to combine multiple soft synths at once. So kind of creating these really thick software layers of sound. That's what I really like about that one. But everything else, from an external gear perspective, the thing that you have to kind of remember is you got to have audio inputs to support what you're, bringing in. So I have the Apollo 8, which gives me 8 inputs from an input perspective. But because I have so much gear, I ended up having to get a Scarlett Optipre, which is an additional 8, and I'm using the ADAT for that. So you have to kind of be mindful of those things when you're trying to build a hybrid setup of external gear. You actually need input sources to be able to support them. The other thing that recently had to get upgraded was my MIDI interface. Some of the gear that I have is USB MIDI based, which makes it easy to deal with from a MIDI standpoint, but a lot of gear doesn't, like a lot of the older gear plus the modular stuff, it doesn't work that way. So I ended up having to get an additional MIDI interface. The one that I selected is by iConnectivity. Very new model for me because it includes Ethernet capabilities. So if I wanted to be able to use my iPad, I could use my iPad with it. If I wanted to add some iPad apps. Also has Wi-Fi capabilities, which is pretty decent. I never had that before with my Motu. I upgraded from a Motu fast lane, which is like a little bitty square or triangular little fob that only had like 2 input sources on it. So the Mio actually has 4 input sources, plus you have access to be able to add additional units by stacking them, or if you're going to be trying to tie all of your MIDI stuff together, including the USB based items, it has host connections on the back for USB inputs, which is kind of nice. It's kind of different. If you're kind of limited on your USB ports on your computer, you can actually kind of plug everything into the singular point and then just label by port to keep things organized. I found that to be pretty attractive. So, but from there, the other thing is always with my setup is the wires and the power. I've never shown anybody the wires and the power, so I'm going to show you guys what that looks like. It's not pretty. At some point, I'm going to have to take all of my stuff apart and redo the wiring again. I find myself having to do that a lot. I don't know why. It's like I start with a specific path for all my wiring, and then after you add more pieces, it gets more complicated. So you end up with this spaghetti thing of wires. So I'm gonna probably end up having to take it all apart and redo it again, unfortunately, but such is life, right? But it won't be anytime soon, because that is just, it's a lot. It probably would take me 3 or 4 days to get through it, to get everything all sorted out. I've actually been thinking about a plan for it, maybe making like a power station, buying this extremely long strip of power input strip, and then separating the power sources from the audio sources and building like another little tray on the back of my keyboard, or on the back of my desk, that has separate for power, separate for audio, kind of separating things so that there's not any cable attenuation. I don't ever really have that type of issue as far as sound noise goes. I have had some issues lately every once in a while with the modular gear, with some of the cables causing a grounding issue. Ended up having to buy better cables that are made better with better grounds, and that kind of fixes the issue. But yeah, it's when you're dealing with external gear, you have to think about the cabling, your cabling scheme, and it can get pretty messy, especially with the modular stuff, because the modular stuff by nature is kind of messy with the extra cables that you're using for creating the patches with. So sometimes it can be a little messy. Well, that's all I have for now. I'll see you on the next one.